Okay, so we've all heard the news. Shadow Generations isn't only a real leak, it's a real game. And they're doing some crazy things with this new experience. Black Doom being put front and center alongside Shadow. You could have told me about this a week ago. I would not have believed you. What a time to be around, especially if you're a long-time fan from back in the day. Now, today's title might have annoyed a couple of you because I'm here to talk about Sonic Generations not standing the test of time, which is definitely against public opinion. Most people around today will tell you Sonic Generations is good, was always good, and is one of the top 5 3D games. And they're allowed to think that. But in my opinion, the gameplay of Sonic Generations is actually overrated. But I will go into why throughout this video. Before we begin though, with this new information of Shadow joining into the fray, I think it's better to shape this conversation around what we want to see this game do that the original did not. So kicking off with the least consequential but by no means irrelevant point of the storytelling in Sonic Generations. To be frank, it's terrible. The game was a celebration of all of Sonic's history at that point, even more so than any other anniversary game, and yet it doesn't pull upon the story history of the characters and the world to present us with new interesting conflicts that could only take place in a story that gets to play with time travel. Instead, we get a white void with Sonic's friends only appearing for unlockable cutscenes when you free them, and then to cheer him on at the end, and we get basically no development or insights into any of our characters, not even the newly reintroduced classic versions of them. Tails Classic does get to talk a little bit about the way that he and his older self admire Sonic, but that's about it. Huge waste of potential. Even if you don't care about stories in Sonic games, it would be a lie to act as if stories weren't a reason that many other people came and found the series and loved the characters and wanted to see them grow. So the fact that this celebration doesn't touch upon that is a big negative. But it isn't the gameplay, so let's transition over to that. Modern Sonic is using the boost formula template, which was relatively new. They'd already done it in Unleashed in Colors, but these games came out pretty close to each other, and it plays fine for that genre. The boost is invincible, you gain more charge by destroying enemies, collecting items and gathering rings, as well as using trick systems, which is pretty much from the Rush games that the boost was born from, and a very nice inclusion. Other than that move though, Sonic has his homing attack, the slide, the stomp, and jumping. So it's a pretty standard set for Sonic, but that's all it needs to be, and yet I actually do still have some problems with it. Coming back to this game for this video was surprising because his jumps were heavier and lower to the ground than I thought I remembered. Obviously, I haven't played Generations in quite a long time until now, and so I've been playing more games like the Sonic 06 Fan Remaster, or Adventure 2, or Frontiers, way more recently than Generations, and you notice the difference. On top of that, his controls as just walking around at lower speeds, 100% better than Sonic Forces, where he was a tank and not in a good way, but you do slightly notice there's a stiffness and rigidity. It doesn't impact the gameplay too much, you could even platform in 3D in Generations thankfully, but it is there, and you do notice it if it's been a while. The homing attack works fine, the rebounce animations don't take too much time, and you feel like you're ploughing through enemies as you would hope Sonic could. However, his normal jump does bother me, besides the fact that it can feel a bit low and you really wish there was a double jump in this game, and usually I don't want double jumps, but in Generations I felt like I was missing it. Aside from that, if you tap the jump button, Sonic will instead do a small hop, which doesn't curl him into a ball, meaning if you do it on an enemy, you'll die. Some of you might think, why would you ever do it to an enemy, but especially if you've played basically any other Sonic game, you'll know that just doing a quick jump into someone can be effective to save time at low speeds where you don't want to waste it doing a homing attack, and you don't want to spend your boost. Problem is, you do that here, Sonic's going to take damage and all your momentum is gone. Why is this move in the game? Purely because some levels have this gimmick section with small ledges that if you press the tap jump, you'll hop over them and maintain full speed, and it looks cool, I guess. But it doesn't add anything beyond those small set pieces. That's the only reason this hop is even in the game, and it's for a fraction of your playtime. But it means you can't just jump into enemies without holding down the jump button every time, getting the full height and losing the max amount of speed possible for it, which isn't ideal. And unfortunately, that's not the only part of Sonic's moveset that had a strange philosophy put into it for this game. Sonic's Lightspeed Dash was separated from his core mechanics and only implemented in certain stages under trails of glowing rings. But why? Why couldn't you just Lightspeed Dash at all times of the game in any trail of rings like it worked in every other game? Even Adventure 1 with the clunkiest and slowest ring dash would let you trail any line of rings if you charged up. So this restriction is entirely arbitrary and turns what used to be a fun speed gaining mechanic into just a set piece, and you just need to remember, oh, this mission's got that, so I press this button for once when I see the glowing rings, and that's it. It could basically be a grind rail because that's all it's acting as. It's not a move you can do at any time if you find the opportunity. It's a set piece that you can grind on if you remember to jump on it, which is the same criticism basically for those ledge hops I was on about before. And unfortunately they do it one more time with wall jumping. In 2D sections, there may be special pads on the wall indicating Sonic can cling and jump off of them, but why does it have to be a special pad? Why can't it be any surface in a 2D section to expand your options at expressing yourself in gameplay as you choose to traverse up walls or ignore them? Instead, no, only if the pad's there and you have to do it and it's the only option. So it could just be a grind rail. That's something that Sonic Generations has a lot of, being spectacle. And spectacle can win a lot of people over. You see Sonic being chased by a giant robotic fish or bouncing off the noses of orca whales, and it does look good and it's fun and interesting. But these set pieces will wear out. When you play the game multiple times, or it's been many years, they're not new anymore. You know they're coming, and they can still look good, but it doesn't change or improve your gameplay experience. These are moments where you're just observing something nice in the background of what's going on in the game. I think that people tend to give Generations a bit too much credit for what boils down to spectacle, when what you're actually doing in the gameplay boils down to rail grinding. In fact, Sonic Generations still feels a bit like a boosting corridor game, where the 3D sections are kind of limited and restricted to boosting. I'll touch on that a little bit more after we talk about his classic counterpart, because yes, obviously, classic Sonic's playable in this game, and I don't enjoy playing as him. I don't actually return to classic levels if it's not for a video or something. I would just play the normal modern ones and call it a day, because classic Sonic's controls aren't great. Now, at the time of Generations release, you wouldn't have said that, and I wouldn't have said that, because we were used to Sonic 4 Episode 1 as the most recent two-dimensional Sonic, which was terrible. At least this one looked the part, had the sound effects, and the proper moves. It's just that they don't function properly. Sonic's physics are all wrong, and if the word physics and a momentum is going to annoy you, you've been on the internet too long. These are just fundamental parts of the classic Sonic gameplay, and they should be talked about. And they're wrong in Sonic Generations. You lose speed if you're rolled in a ball at a shocking rate. You have to stay running on your feet. And this is something Sonic Team have been doing for a while now, and I don't know why. It's ball goes fast, feet stay the same. I don't know why we can't just have it work that way, but alas, it's how it is. You get the spin dash, which you can rev up like in the old days, but it doesn't work as a momentum gaining device. Instead, it's a giant bazooka that slingshots Sonic at immense speed that quickly tapers off and can cause him to fly over the level. It's fun, don't get me wrong, and people have done all sorts of speed runs with it, but it's also pretty gimmicky, because sometimes the level won't let you take advantage of it, and other times it breaks the level completely. But at least it's something unique to do with this classic Sonic, because since he lacks the proper momentum physics, the rest of his gameplay is very stale, just moving at a gradual pace and jumping here and there. Again, it doesn't interest me a whole lot, not to mention it's all in 2D. So I think that's a good segue into returning to the level conversation. The design philosophy behind the stages of Sonic Generations is heavily 2D focused. You have a whole character based on the 2D Sonic, and then the modern Sonic still has to share his gameplay with 2D sections. This always disappointed me even when the game was new and I liked it a lot more, because the line of thinking was, why does 3D Sonic still have 2D when 2D Sonic is right there? And because they also share the same zones, that overlap does really stick in your mind. Now, to be fair to Sonic Generations, its levels feature a fair amount of branching pathways with minimal points of overlapping, which means that your skill will determine what route you get, but it also means if you replay these levels a fair few times, you will be able to experience brand new sections you didn't before because of the effort put into them. That is a bonus. Both classic and modern Sonic's levels have this element, although modern Sonic tends to save these differences for its 2D sections more so than its 3D sections. And as I said before, some of the 3D sections for modern Sonic unfortunately are just transitional corridors between the more important 2D sections. This isn't true 100% of the time. For example, Seaside Hill, modern, is probably the most open 3D stage in the game, with the most 3D areas that branch off into other 3D areas, instead of just being narrow corridors. However, that stage does still feature 2D sections, but it is the best example Generations has, and that's why it's also my favourite level to play in Generations. The stages have nice detail to them, such as cars in Speed Highway braking if classic Sonic gets in their way, and that's, again, nice spectacle, but it doesn't do too much for you after the first couple times. This is not to say that these are bad things, and it's not to say that you can't like the gameplay despite what I've just listed out, but you can't ignore the fact that these are problems some people are going to have. One of the greater problems, though, is the pacing of the game. There are 9 zones, each with an Act 1 Classic and an Act 2 Modern. If you only enjoy one of those playstyles, then you've only got 9 levels. But to be fair, if you're going to play this game in the modern day, you should be willing to at least try both of them. Here's the thing though, you don't get them all at once. You get them in batches of 3. And to get past each section, you're going to need to collect 3 keys to unlock a boss fight. How do you get those keys? You've got to do some mission modes, and this is a sort of padding out the game time. The missions are of varying quality, but a lot of them devolve into, here's a level you've already played, we've put some boxes on it, we've changed the enemies, now do it under a certain condition. And I didn't find that very engaging. The one exception to that rule is that some of these missions bring in Sonic's friends, those really underutilized characters, and do things like a race or using them as a partner skill from Sonic Advance 3 to complete an objective. Those were the ones I would always seek out to do in order to progress the game. Any mission will unlock you rewards such as music or artwork to view, and that's all well and good, but again, once you've heard and listened to it before, you've heard and listened to it before. At the end of the day, if you start a new game, you need to do these missions again to progress, and I just don't think they're that interesting, and it's so obvious they're here to slow the game down. Unfortunately, the reward for doing all of that busy work are pretty lackluster boss fights. I'm not going to pretend that boss fights in Sonic have always been amazing and the highlights of the experience. We all know that's not true, but in Generations, they're pretty spectacle over substance once again. The Death Egg robot, the first real boss of the game, is very, very simple. It looks visually impressive, but all you do is wait for him to jump, to spin dash behind him and hit him, and then wait for him to charge up an attack so that he hits a bomb and hit him. Look how quickly I destroy Phase 2, and this is me after not playing in years. So yeah, not the most impressive showing, and on top of that, without trying, I found a new bug for the first time ever. I'd forgotten that you need to progress the phase by getting shot up by a ground pound onto the foreground of the level, so I kept dodging Eggman's attack, and then one day, the floor just decides to disappear and Sonic falls to death in a very buggy way. I have no idea how this happened. In fact, there was another bug with classic Sonic, where I was playing Speed Highway, I failed a platforming segment, and landed in some geometry, and it was only thanks to the overpowered spin dash I even got out of there. So I'm not quite sure what was going on with Generations that day, but there's proof that unfortunately, nothing is flawless. And that reminds me of one more issue with classic Sonic whilst we're at it. His spin dash has a habit of being locked to the Z-axis if you use it when you're transitioning from looking left to right or the other way around. This shouldn't even be a problem, because Classic is never meant to use that axis, but for some reason Sega have allowed him to pivot there and lock his spin dash facing you, and of course if you let go when it's doing that, it doesn't go anywhere, so just waste your time. The rest of the bosses are a little bit more acceptable, Perfect Chaos probably being the best main boss fight, and the rival battles are all a fair bit better than the bosses as well, but the final boss with the Time Eater, absolute travesty. I can't even be asked to replay it, I'm not gonna lie, it's not worth doing. Just bad. Terrible way to end the game. And so with those points, this is why I don't think Generations is as good as people say. I can completely understand why people enjoy it, especially if they grew up with the game, but I don't think it automatically deserves being titled as the best boosting game or the best 3D game by default. However, maybe the Shadow portion of the game coming up can change the conversation. As we've seen, the story is already immediately more important for Shadow Generations. I've also seen people online complain or question why is the game, like Generations that had no story, being used to create a story for Shadow. But that's exactly why it was a good idea. In concept, having the Time Eater should have allowed for great creative storytelling. And now, this time, we're actually going to get it with a character that's all about driving a story forward, Shadow. And the Time Eater is presumably why Black Doom has made it back into the current day. So we're going to get to see more of him, more of his shenanigans, and more of how he's going to test Shadow and explore his past, because it's still Generations at the end of the day. But just think about how many things they could actually capitalize on that Generations didn't. Maybe characters that didn't interact before will get the chance. Maybe actions that weren't taken in the past will be tested here for an alternate demonstration of a timeline. The possibilities are endless, and I'll be lying if a big part of me isn't going to hope that by the end of this game, Black Doom remains alive and a threat for the future. But past threats have already been stated to be returning, and we've seen the Biolizard, for instance, so it's possible that perhaps Mephiles the Dark will show up. If he does, I would imagine it just to be a cameo boss fight or something, because Black Doom is clearly the big bad of this game. But, I mean, come on, having one of his 06 boss fights for Shadow now would be amazing. Infinite, technically, could be considered one of Shadow's rivals. I mean, if Sega even remembers that character exists, I'm not too keen on seeing him again, but if they make it good, they make it good. But the gameplay also looks promising. I was just saying that Sonic's moveset was arbitrarily chopped to bits in Generations and turned into show dressing more than anything else. But here we get to see Shadow using Chaos Snap, using Chaos Spear in gameplay under the player control at any time, giving you more agency, making them feel different from Sonic, and improving the moveset overall, which is what I wish they did with Sonic in Generations. Maybe Shadow can even light speed dash on Trails of Rings, that would be nice. And the game mentions we should expect to see brand new powers never before done in this experience. So all of that seems to already clear my criticism of the moveset being weakened in Generations. They're going for it hard with this game. People have pointed out it's clearly based off Frontier's game engine as a negative, which confuses me because I could have sworn that everyone was super for Frontier's engine and gameplay just a year ago when it was still all the rage, but I guess people's opinions change quick. Still, I was never hardcore fan of Frontier's gameplay, but for combat especially, it was obviously better than Generations, and it should be better than Frontiers because they've heard our complaints, and you would hope they tweaked the engine in between then and now so that the controls are less clunky when you're moving around. If they didn't, that's a massive criticism for Sega, but even the most incompetent person I think could adapt the criticism in the time they've had here. Unlike base Generations, I am hoping that this doesn't rely on 2D sections. Please, we don't need that. Classic's already there, Modern's already there, let Shadow just actually be 3D. In Frontiers, one of the biggest criticisms for the overworld was that in islands like the Chaos Islands, you were still shoved into 2D for really no reason. I'm pretty sure nobody liked that. Just have a 3D experience, improve on the mistake you made by making Modern half 2D. Please, just do that. This is your chance. I think that Shadow Generations has a lot of potential. The real question is how long will it be? If it's just the 2 levels we saw in the 1 boss fight, then that's way too short. But based on the fact that we've been told Black Doom's going to be doing a lot of things, and that Shadow's going to learn a lot of powers, I am pretty sure it's going to be longer than what we've been shown. Please, please, please don't make this a half an hour experience. Honestly, I'm just happy that Shadow is finally getting some genuine care and attention put back into the character after so long, instead of just apparently being phoned in for the crowd support. And if I'm being even more honest with you, I'm ready for Shadow the Hedgehog 2, guns and all, just give it to me. Don't say it couldn't work. Kids are playing Fortnite and Power World these days. Guns are just the new thing. Oh man, I want that game so bad. So, what do you think about my thoughts here today on both Generations? I understand my stance is not popular, but I'm not doing it to be a contrarian. This is genuinely my thoughts of the game, and if it wasn't for this video, I probably wouldn't have touched Generations again. And as for Shadow, are you optimistic or pessimistic? Do you see the potential, or is it just shallow marketing? Let me know your thoughts for both in the comments down below, and thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. It really supports the channel and lets me know that this is the type of content you want to see. Feel free to share any more ideas in the comments down below. But until next time, I hope to see you again and to have a great day. This is the Mighty Emperor, signing off.